everyone. Welcome to Unchained, your no-hype resource for all things crypto. I'm your host, Laura Shin. In case you haven't heard, I have another crypto podcast called Unconfirmed. It's shorter, newsier, and comes out Fridays. If you haven't yet, go subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts. Also, find out what I think are the top stories in crypto by signing up for my weekly newsletter at unchainedpodcast.com.
CipherTrace cutting-edge cryptocurrency intelligence powers anti-money laundering, blockchain analytics, and threat intel. Leading exchanges, virtual currency businesses, banks, and regulators themselves use CipherTrace to comply with regulation and to monitor compliance.
Are you passionate about blockchain but fall short on the technical skills to build and deploy blockchain applications? Then check out SimbaChain, the smart contract as a service blockchain simplification layer on simbachain.com, and their new enterprise offering on the Microsoft Azure Marketplace.
Kraken is the best exchange in the world for buying and selling digital assets. It has the tightest security, deep liquidity, and a great fee structure with no minimum or hidden fees. Whether you're looking for a simple fiat on-ramp or leveraged options trading, Kraken is the place for you.
My guest today from Berlin is Luis Cuende, the CEO at Aragon One. Welcome, Luis.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
What problem are you trying to solve with Aragon?
The thing that we are trying to solve with Aragon is that human governance is very broken, both at like the micro level, like the way we interact with each other and the way we organize. Like it's very hard for someone in the world that is in Argentina to organize with someone from Iran, for example, because of multiple regulations that make it almost impossible. But also at the macro level, like governance is broken and democracy is, I would say, in the last stages of growth. And we need to come up with new systems that are better for human coordination, as we have seen also in the West with like Donald Trump winning the U.S. elections and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, actually, so what makes you say that democracy is in the last stages of growth?
Well, I think if you look at like technological revolutions, they have this period sometime in which they have like early adopters and then they grow and then they have like this kind of productivity plateau in which they just kind of stabilize over time. And that means that we have taken the most out of them and now there is time for a new thing to come up. And I think we have taken out the most of democracy already, at least in the West. And now new models have to come that are better for human coordination. And maybe even they come in new forms. Maybe they come in the form of smaller communities that coordinate between them instead of having like these huge monoliths that we consider nation states today that are like hundreds of millions of people. So I think it's time to experiment with new models.
And so what does ideal governance look like to you?
Well, I think that's a very hard question because that depends so much on like the actual like governance model that we are looking at and the problem that we're trying to solve. I think in terms of nation states, it's very, very hard to empathize with millions of people. And I think that's the number one problem in society today. Like we cannot empathize with another citizen because there are like 100 million citizens in a country and they are so different from one another. And so I think if we can start dividing that into like smaller units that obey Dunbar's number, which is the number of people your brain can empathize with, I think we may have better communities rather than having these monolith nation states in which everyone starts fighting each other.
But what is Dunbar's number? Isn't that a really low number? Like 150 or something?
150, yeah.
So the world should be governed in little communities of 150 people?
That's something that I really wanted to like experiment with. I would love to try that out, try if, having these smaller communities also improves meaning in life, because I think we have like a crisis of meaning right now. So like my generation, for example, like there are literally like social apps in like Finland and the north of Europe to like connect like teenagers because they feel isolated. And that's so crazy to me today. With like Instagram and Facebook and all of these things, we feel more and more alone than, any other time in life.
And your generation, meaning, like, how old are you?
I'm 23 right now. Yeah.
And actually, why don't you tell a little bit about your story? How did you get into the blockchain space?
For sure. So I got into software when I was 12 years old because of Linux and free software. And it was kind of mind-blowing to me because I come from a humble family, and the fact that you could basically get a computer and just start creating stuff, and there was no limit. There was no need to like go to a store and buy anything at all. It was all for free and open. That was mind-blowing for me. And also that kind of post-capitalistic sort of like idea that people were working for free on the internet and they were like creating free software for other people to use it without any expectation of profit. That was I didn't understand the reasoning behind it, and I'm not sure I understand it yet, but it was so mind-blowing for me. And then I saw Bitcoin in 2009 when the white paper came out.
Oh.
And I thought it was a scam. I thought like this is technically impossible. I didn't really even read the white paper. And then in 2011 I read the white paper and I was mind blown. It was around the financial crisis that hit Spain very bad, where I'm from, and also hit my family very bad. And when I read the whole white paper, at the end I was like, oh my God, this is going to change the power dynamics of the world so much, and I really want to be involved.
Wow. Okay. All right. And then I guess why don't you briefly fill us in and how you came from that point to launching Aragon?
Yeah, so in 2013 or 14, I really got involved more and more into the Bitcoin space. I was doing some small projects here and there, but then I wanted to do a Bitcoin exchange with a couple of partners I had back in the day, and that didn't work out because of we couldn't basically raise money for it. And then in 2014, we came up with Stampery, which is blockchain timestamping, basically. I think it's one of the main platforms that are doing that now, although it took a long time for it to get any sort of traction. So we launched that startup to allow people to timestamp. We had the dream of eliminating notary publics using the blockchain, which was a pretty obvious use case, right? But then these things take a lot of time. And then in 2016, I went out of the blockchain space for a few months to pursue something with my now co-founder Jorge, which we met when we were 16 and 16.
What's his last name?
Jorge Izquierdo. We met when we were 15 or 16 in Spain via Twitter, and we were both young hackers. And then we started working on multiple things. And then in 2016, I asked him to join a crazy idea I had related to patents and basically eliminating the patent system. And then at some point we moved to the US, we did the whole Silicon Valley thing, and at some point we realized that the underlying issue wasn't really the patent system in the US, for example. It was politicians and the power dynamics that you just don't want to change it. You just want to keep the patent trolls trolling and these big companies to own these patents so they can have huge monopolies. And so at some point we figured out the underlying issue was governance of the country and of the law system, and not patent themselves. So we came up with Aragon.
Yeah. Well, also, I don't know. Do you remember that I interviewed you once about Stampery?
Seriously?
I did.
Wow.
Yeah. But the very first question I asked you was how you prevent lies or falsehoods from getting on the blockchain. And I'm just going to tell you straight, you didn't have a good answer for it. So I was like,
I still don't, I think.
What?
I still don't have a good answer for that, I think.
Right. And you were saying you wanted to just be a notary system. So I was like, okay, this is so far away from being that. But anyway. All right. So before we get into Aragon, why don't we just define a few things, because there's the Aragon Network, there's Aragon Association, there's Aragon One. So why don't you just high level overview describe the whole setup?
Exactly. Yeah. So Aragon itself is the project and the movement that has the mission to create decentralized organizations for the world and to basically allow the people to experiment with governance at the speed of software. And so for that, we have the Aragon Network, we have the Aragon Association, and a few other entities. And so we have this multi-team model in which instead of having one team that grows to 1,000 people, we want to decentralize also development. And so we have this model in which the holders of a token, that is the Aragon Network token, can vote proposals to basically govern the whole project. And so one of the proposals, or one of the ways that they can do that, is to choose the development teams that are going to carry development. And so Aragon One is a team I lead, and that's the foundational team working on Aragon's development. But there is also Aragon Black, Otarg, and there are many other small Aragon teams that are working on the ecosystem. Then there is the Aragon Network, and the Aragon Network is the broad sort of DAO that governs the project itself. And it also wants to provide services to other DAOs. And so, for example, one of them is the Aragon Court. We want to create a dispute resolution system for DAOs so they can use dry code, which is smart contracts, but they can also use wet code, which is basically human written agreements that we're very used to in the in the traditional world, let's say. So we can combine the best of both worlds. So that's a little bit of an overview. Then we have also a grants program called Aragon Nest that has been giving out grants for multiple things. We were the first ones to give grants for Ethereum 2.0 development. But that's a little bit of an overview of the ecosystem.
Okay, yeah. And early on, when you talked about Aragon One, for listeners who know kind of how Ethereum development happened, there was a period early on where there was the Ethereum Foundation, and then ETHDev was the company that was formed to do the development for the network. All right, so then why don't we just start with like what it is and what people can do if they want to use this system?
Yeah, so right now we have the Aragon client, which is this app that allows you to create decentralized organizations. And so you can do multiple things. You can, for example, create like a membership kind of organization in which you can literally just list members and manage funds, for example. That's a very easy use case that people are doing in the Ethereum community with other kind of DAOs, like Moloch comes to mind and stuff like that, right? In which you have like a group of friends and then they put funds in and then they manage funds. That's like a very easy use case. But then you also have like use cases that are, I think, a little more ambitious, that are more like open DAOs in which anyone can join.
Well, wait, actually, but to go back to the membership one, is that like a centralized type of entity using the Aragon network, or?
Well, no, it will be like a decentralized kind of entity that you create on Aragon, and then it's like basically like a permission entity in the sense that like people have to vote for new members to come in. But that will be something that will live on the Ethereum blockchain, will be like fully decentralized.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and then there is like use cases that are more in terms of like, open DAOs. And so one of them that we are super excited about is fundraising. So there was this model proposed by Vitalik called DAOs, and this model proposed by Luke from our team also called APRI. And so what we're doing here is we're basically creating a DAO that fundraises money, and then the token holders can decide to set what's called the tap rate. And so that's the amount of like money that flows to like development teams to implement this idea for this project. And so the cool thing there is that basically you are like inverting the power structure. So token holders are the ones that control the project and the money flows, and not the other way around. So basically, I think with that you can have fundraisers that are like 2017 scale, like very big fundraisers, but with accountability and transparency that we didn't see in 2017. So that's one model that I'm super excited about.
And did that pass?
Well, that's going to be launching like a couple of weeks from now.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, because he's blogged about that for quite a while, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in the DAO space, there's always like, it takes some time to actually implement things because everyone is so afraid of like consequences, right? So like when the DAO happened and the fork happened and all of that, it took years until like someone literally said like, we're going to implement DAOs again. Because there's like those things that people are really fearful about. And I think like fundraising is the thing that people are like very fearful about as well, right? Because we have a lot of like legal implications and the SEC and all of these things, right? And so, but that shouldn't impede us for innovating. That's why we're here, right? I'm personally not here to see that like there are SEC compliant ICOs happening. Like I don't really care about that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't get into the space to like, basically facilitate the life for the nation state. I got into the state so we can replace the nation state.
Okay. Well, so to tie all that together, I did want to ask you about, this fact that you're trying to build a DAO because, given the history with the DAO, that might seem kind of bold to some people because that was a huge failure. So why did you decide to build a DAO and a platform for DAOs?
Well, when we looked at the DAO, it was interesting because, you look at it and the idea itself was really great. Then the problem was implementation, right? But it's one of these cases where it was very unfortunate that it was called the DAO, because then the whole DAO concept just got basically screwed over for years. But if you look at it, like the concept itself is a brilliant concept. The problem was implementation. And so if you're rational, you think, let's just make an implementation that works, right? And we invested a lot of money and time into making sure that this gets audited. And I think we've been live for like a year and some months with no bugs found, or critical ones at least. So super happy about that.
All right. So why don't we'll just talk about the platform. So you kind of actually walked through us a little bit. So if I have a simple DAO, like a membership thing, I can do that. So then actually talk about some of the other features that people can implement.
Yeah, so there is a system with like multiple apps that you can install and uninstall. You can think about it like Lego bricks. Like basically you can build very basic, very complex structures, just like putting together these bricks that are very generic. And so by default, there's like a finance app which allows you to manage finances, and then you can send the URL to anyone for them to check the finances in a transparent way. There's a voting app that allows you to vote on stuff. There's a token manager app that allows you to like manage token balances, mint tokens for new people, slash them as well. So you can do all of those things. And then there are more apps that are kind of not by default, but that are super important as well. So, for example, there is this suite of apps for Aragon called Open Enterprise that allows people to manage like more like open organizations. And so, for example, you can have something like Gitcoin where you fund bounties and people can come and claim those bounties and directly on Aragon, on the Aragon DAO. You can have like a dot voting app, which is like another kind of mechanism for voting. You can have like an allocations app that allows you to have like multiple kind of bank accounts inside the DAO that are controlled in different ways and with different permissions of like who can withdraw money. So you can do all of these things that are very composable. I think right now we're starting to see that how people actually use it for something, because when you create a platform, like at the end, Aragon is like a platform for these apps to be built, and then with these apps you create new organizational structures. But I think the interesting point is when you start having a critical mass in which you can like plug these components in different ways to create new models. And that's where like composability gets seen, and I think that's something that worked out very well for Ethereum. And now we're starting to see that for Aragon, although it takes a little bit to like, from building a platform to like seeing how people use it and compose these things.
And so just to clarify something, because when I was browsing the materials about Aragon, for some reason I got under the conception that companies could use it, and obviously companies are centralized. So is that true or not true?
Well, you can definitely implement a centralized hierarchical company on Aragon. Like, for example, Aragon One, we use Aragon, but we are like a Swiss company, and we use it for finances. We use it for, basically managing finances and voting. So you can definitely do that. I think the issue there is the legal part of it. So, for example, in our case, we implemented this functionality in the finance app so you can export a CSV, because our accountants really wanted to. And I think if you want to do simple stuff like that, you may use Aragon. But if you want to do something more complex, you may want to use some kind of like legal wrapper. So there is this project called Open Law, and they built this very, very cool integration with Aragon and Wyoming LLCs. So they have this online wizard in which you can create an LLC, and it automatically creates an Aragon DAO, and it links both. So like you have legal agreements that literally say like, membership is going to be defined and shares are going to be defined by this token app on Aragon. So when you create a new token on Aragon, it automatically basically is a legally valid way of saying, that's a new share on the Wyoming LLC. So that's a very, very cool use case as well.
How did that come about?
It was a few months ago. A community member called Ross from Open Law, and he just made it happen. I think they're looking to expand to like New York LLCs as well.
Oh, wow.
It's very cool.
Okay. Yeah, I know Caitlin Long was like really instrumental in getting a lot of blockchain-friendly laws passed in Wyoming. So
nice.
I wondered if she was part of that. But actually, something else I wanted to ask about was earlier when you were talking about like how they're composable and like you can make different kinds of organizations. So how are people using them? And like, are you seeing any innovative uses that you hadn't really thought of before?
Well, it was funny. So, like, way before we came up with Aragon fundraising and implementing this fundraising mechanism on Aragon, we saw a DAO that was basically, they were like a very small smart contract that would basically use the finance app on Aragon and the tokens app on Aragon, so that if there was a new deposit to the finance app, they would mint a new token for that member. So it was effectively fundraising before we implemented fundraising, and that was really funny to see. It's actually a very cool project. They are. And one of my, I think, favorite use cases, most of the developers are based in Iran. So, of course, like, if you're based there, you're automatically discriminated in the whole world, right? So, like, I think Aragon was one of the only ways that they could have, fundraise to build their software and their project.
Wow. And so this is actually a perfect segue to my next question, because I was wondering, so obviously we've got like the normal traditional legal jurisdictions all around the world. So how did those laws fit with or not fit with these entities that you're creating on Aragon? Well,
it's the intersection between dry code and wet code, which is what like Nick Szabo used to call these things. It's very
and just clarify that for people. So wet code is like human courts of law, and then dry code is like code.
Exactly.
Okay.
Computer code. Yeah. Smart contracts. And that's super interesting because, for example, when I think about declaring taxes, right? So you want to declare your taxes, you see your crypto portfolio, but then like how do you declare a CDP? How do you declare an NFT? How do you declare an asset that maybe even like illiquid in the market? Like it's just kind of so hard because the system of smart contracts are Turing complete. And the way that the law works is that they try to cover every edge case with regulation. The issue is that you cannot cover a Turing complete set of options with regulation because that's like infinite. Like every line of code may be like totally different and may do like a totally different thing. So like it's intrinsically impossible to make these two systems work. That's my sort of like idea that I have built over the course of the past years. I think you can implement something like these legal wrappers. So like you open a Wyoming LLC and then you have like shares on your Aragon Corporation and then like the finances. But if you want to install a new app on Aragon that is totally different, for example, this fundraising app, or use like a bonding curve for one of these like more bleeding-edge technologies, how do you translate that to the legal system is like totally, I think, out of the reach of the legal system. So I think if we want to exploit the 100% of the potential of decentralized organizations, we have to forget about the old and we just have to build the new.
Well, so then if someone's creating a DAO on Aragon and the different people that are using it are in different jurisdictions, then does that create problems for one or the other of them?
That is a great question. Well, I think the way you can look at it, and we've been looking at some of these jurisdictions, some of them may treat the DAO as a general partnership, some maybe don't. And the issue there, one of the issues with like how legality works is that it's not built for the internet. It's not built for a world where you can join a DAO and just be part of it, right? So, and there are a lot of interesting questions that arise. So, for example, if you're a passive stakeholder of a DAO, let's say you are a token holder of, MakerDAO, and MakerDAO does something that is illegal in one jurisdiction, which, it's not that hard. There are jurisdictions in which, like, many things are illegal. For example, think about jurisdictions like Thailand or even Spain, where like you just cannot insult the monarchy, right? So imagine that there is the Aragon Network DAO, which has the ability to do proclamations. So like to say, as a DAO, I proclamate something on behalf of my members, and this DAO insults the monarchy in one of these places. Are you liable now for that? It's a very hard question, and I think I don't have the answer. I just think we should be brave and try to experiment with it. Yeah,
actually, on a related note, and this might seem unrelated, but I think it is similar. I literally just yesterday read this article where there was some astronaut who basically did something in space, and I guess she was going through a divorce, and she accessed the bank account of her wife, who she was separating from. And the wife was claiming that it was like a criminal act, and she was claiming that they had these shared financial accounts to, manage the finances for their son. And anyway, but the article was saying like there are no laws around if she's in space at the time, then how do you manage that? So. I agree that obviously now, with blockchains also there's like this whole new territory that opens up, and it's not clear how these things will be managed. But actually, yet another perfect segue, because I was going to ask you about disputes as well, and you have this whole dispute system managed by the Aragon Court. So what is that, and when do people use that function, and how does it work?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the most exciting parts of a decentralized organization is that you may be able to just completely create new jurisdictions on the internet. But the problem with the smart contracts is that they are very limited. So like you can encode a very small part of the world because of the meat space, because there are like a lot of like human subtleties. So you may be able to describe a lot of things with like computer code, but you cannot, for example, say, Ethereum should know about my tablet or about my computer, and when I leave a company, it should know that I need to like return that, right, to my employer. And so the idea with the Aragon Court is that you can also add this human written language or human written code or basically like a contract to a smart contract. So in that way, you have the best of both worlds. And the problem there, when we thought about it, was like, right, this is amazing for dispute resolution. This is amazing for basically creating or adding a lot of capabilities to decentralized organizations that they didn't have before. But the issue is that courts are hard to run. And I mean, it's not that easy to like create literally like a court. You have to create a system of law around it, right? And so when we thought about it, we saw that courts are traditionally very expensive. They are very slow. Like we have cases, or I have seen cases where there are claims against like, huge corporations. And the case is very clear, but these corporations have so much money that they are able to extend it for years or decades and then settle. And that's it, right? And so I believe if we can incentivize fairness by creating a global jurisdiction, which basically has a court. I think the court is a core component, is the one that makes sure that you incentivize fairness or you incentivize like people to follow the system of law. We can empower DAOs much more. And so the idea here is, with the court, is basically you can create a dispute, you can access this pool of euros that are incentivized to actually behave because of cryptoeconomic incentives. And then the cool thing is that over time you're going to build jurisprudence that is global. It's not like linked to any local jurisdiction. So you may be able to study this one system of law and then basically use it anywhere in the world as a global way.
And who are the jurors? Like, how are they chosen? Are they just people who hold the Aragon Network token, or?
Yeah, so jurors need to stake ANT in order to become participants of this network. And so jurors, like anyone, can be a juror, basically, which I think it's very cool. And then they are chosen randomly. So, for example, in the first round, when you open a dispute, you may be assigned 5 jurors randomly, and then you can, if you don't agree with the result, you can basically, raise it to like the next level, and then maybe like 21, and then more, and until you raise a dispute to like the whole network, and all the jurors can participate. And so that makes it very, very hard for anyone to try to game the system, because at the end, you're just going to make it very, very expensive you're going to basically make it so expensive that they would have to buy the entire network, or like 51% of the whole like Aragon network, for them to like win a case.
And I mean, you keep talking about how, the normal legal system is expensive. So how do you guys pay for your court?
Yeah, so there's like a flat subscription fee that organizations pay. And then there's like a dispute fee. And so...
Wait, and do they pay the fee only when they have a dispute going, or like forever?
Well, we're thinking about it still. I think that there's going to be like a very small kind of flat fee, like yearly flat fee kind of thing. And then just like per dispute. Because I think it makes sense to have it per dispute. So you only pay when you really use it, right? But on the other hand, you also need to like keep the jurors being paid in some way, because what you want to... Like these systems, the thing that you want them to use for is... You want to have them there, so if you need it, you can use them, but hopefully you incentivize everyone to not use them, right? And so you need to like even pay euros for doing nothing, because they are just there, so you don't need to use them. I mean, you need to use them, right, at some point in time, but ideally you don't, right? It's just like everyone sees that they are going to lose money by opening a dispute, and so no one does. That's like the sort of like incentive structure.
That makes sense. All right, so in a moment, we're going to discuss more about governance in the Aragon Network. But first, a quick word from the sponsors who make this show possible.
Today's episode is brought to you by Kraken. Kraken is the best exchange in the world for buying and selling digital assets. With all the recent exchange hacks and other troubles, you want to trade on an exchange you can trust. Kraken's focus on security is utterly amazing. Their liquidity is deep, and their fee structure is great, with no minimum or hidden fees. They even reward you for trading, so you can make more trades for less. If you're a beginner, you will find an easy on-ramp from 5 fiat currencies. And if you're an advanced trader, you'll love their 5x margin and futures trading. To learn more, please go to kraken.com. That's KRAKEN.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by Simba Chain. Do you have a blockchain idea that could benefit your organization, but are you not sure where to begin? Then go to simbachain.com. Simbachain's API-based approach simplifies blockchain for developers and provides a simple web application that empowers business analysts, domain experts, managers, and executives to design their smart contracts. Simbachain supports Ethereum, Quorum, Stellar, and many more to come. They turn business analysts into API designers and non-blockchain developers into blockchain developers. Check out simbachain.com to quickly build your blockchain application.
Will the world follow France and advocate banning privacy coins? Will government-backed stablecoins become the new fiat? Are distributed and peer-to-peer exchanges just a flash in the pan? The answer is maybe. Virtual currencies can flourish and create a new, private, and more versatile economy. But that grand vision can't happen without keeping crypto clean. And that requires support of governments and accountability for bad actors. Privacy-enhanced compliance using cryptographic controls has the potential to preserve anonymity without compromising legitimate investigations. CipherTrace is working on this vision of the future. Sign up to stay up to date on the Privacy-Enhanced Compliance Initiative and receive authoritative crypto AML reports quarterly. www.ciphertrace.com/keepcryptoclean.
Back to my conversation with Luis of Aragon. So the court system also has appeals. How do appeals work?
Yeah, so appeals is a system where you don't agree with the result of the case and you basically raise to like the next round. And so it just basically grows the amount of jurors that are involved until it's the whole network.
But I think like if one side appeals and then you have to put up a stake for that or something, and then the other side doesn't, then the side that puts up the money automatically wins, right?
Yeah, you have to like basically stake more and more over time. The cool thing about this though is that because I'm very worried about this world where like people who don't have resources cannot appeal, and so they basically lose the case, right? The cool thing about like programmatically like creating these cases is that you can fundraise for them, and so let's say there's a very clear case like a David versus Goliath kind of case, right? So what David can do to win the case against Goliath is like he can say, all right, I'm going to create this DAO, and this DAO is going to fundraise for all the proceeds for my case, and then I'm going to basically split the profits with all the participants that invest in this fundraiser. And so the evidence is public, anyone can just see it, and then if people believe on it, they are like not only incentivized to make it fair, but also incentivized from an economic point of view to invest in this case. So David ends up winning the case, and then they split proceeds.
Very interesting. So let's also now talk about the token, because Aragon actually was first built without a token. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what the ANT token does within the system and how you justify its existence if the Aragon Network actually existed before without the token.
Yeah. Well, so the history was like the following. Basically, we created Aragon, and then at some point we were thinking, all right, if decentralized organizations are mainstream, what comes next? Like, what are the services that we'll need? And so we identified this very important service that was the court. And I think that's actually very very useful for DAOs for one simple reason, and it's 51% attacks. Like, we are seeing that with open DAOs, there is this very, very easy attack that is basically, you can say, I want to propose to withdraw all the money from this DAO to this new DAO that is made out of just 51% of the participants of this original DAO, right? And then all these participants are incentivized to vote yes to take the money out. And the other 49% that maybe like passive stakeholders, they basically get screwed over and they cannot do anything at all. And so if you have this system of dispute resolution, you can say, all right, like, these are the things that are not allowed in this DAO. And so one of them is 51% attacks. And so when someone opens a vote, anyone can dispute it and can basically stop that from happening. And so I think that's the very, very first service that will make DAOs mainstream or help make them mainstream, because otherwise 51% attacks could stop this trend for open DAOs. But there are also other things that may be useful for DAOs in the long term. So we are thinking about building our own layer 1 protocol, our own blockchain as well, very optimized for the use case of DAOs. And so the idea, or how we're thinking about it, is ANT is useful for two things. One of them is pure governance over the project. So ANT holders right now have basically all the governance over the project. They can choose who are the development teams. They can choose proclamations. They can claim, for example, there is the Fight for Freedom Day, February 10th, which is the day that the Aragon Network DAO proclaimed as the sort of yearly vacation for the network. They can do all of these things. And also, they will be able to basically exchange ANT in this bonding curve for other tokens that are the Jurors token, maybe the Aragon Chain token, all of these things, right? But ANT is a pure governance token, basically.
And you mentioned that you guys might try to build your own blockchain, and you're currently on Ethereum. Why would you switch? What is not optimal about Ethereum for Aragon?
Well, things in Ethereum are great in terms of composability. The problem with Ethereum right now is, of course, like in terms of the roadmap, I would say it's not very appealing. The ETH 2.0 roadmap, I think 3 years from now, it's really a lot of time. And so we are really worried about the scalability. So, for example, in 2017, there was the whole like ICO craziness. And so you have one ICO, and that one ICO would basically stop the network from being operational. And now, with Aragon fundraising, we are going to see that maybe multiply by one order of magnitude more, because you can open a fundraise with 2 clicks, have this DAO fundraise money, and it's all on-chain because it's a bonding curve. So basically all transactions happen on-chain. So they are even more expensive than the ICO craze back in 2017. And so if that happens, we could have serious scalability issues. And the problem there is that, there are 2 ways to do it. One of them is to optimize the whole network, or the other one is to just optimize another network that you tailor for that specific use case. And so, for example, you may make cheap or basically free to run operations that are important for DAOs. So one of them that is very important for us is permission checking. So does this holder have permission to withdraw finances from the DAO? And if they don't, what is the best route that they could do it? Maybe they have tokens, maybe they can open a voting so they can withdraw money from the DAO. All of these primitives that we have in our smart contract framework called Aragon OS, they could have way, way, way cheaper prices if we had our own chain. Then the problem there is composability. So ideally, you have all of these protocols on Ethereum, right? And then you are able to access them from these other chains. So a DAO can still open a CDP, a DAO can still own DAI. But that's kind of the rationale that, you can build these chains that are very optimized for certain things, and then they connect back to Ethereum for having network effects or composability.
Or security even, maybe.
Yeah, Ethereum is the most secure smart contract network, and there is, I think, no doubt that it's going to have the maximum security compared to other application-specific chains.
Just to go back earlier in that description, you were saying token bonding curve. Can you describe what that is for people?
Yeah, so if anyone is familiar with stuff like Uniswap, it's a very similar concept. It's basically a way in which you can exchange 2 tokens in a fully decentralized way. And the good thing about the bonding curve is that you can basically define the demand and supply sides. So you can sort of architect the price that it's going to take. So if there is more demand, it might go up more. And you can also basically have reserves attached to this bonding curve. So let's say, for example, in Aragon fundraising, when you buy tokens into the curve, what you are doing is you're, for example, sending DAI or Ether or something into this curve, and then this curve is minting new tokens for you in this DAO that is fundraising. And so what happens in the other way around is you sell these tokens, and then you get part of these reserves out in Ether or DAI or whatever the reserve ratio is defined in. And so that's how a bonding curve works, and it's very, very exciting because you can basically, in the case of Aragon fundraising, get rid of centralized exchanges. You don't need to be listed in Binance or Coinbase or anything like that. You can just have this bonding curve, and then in a decentralized way, anyone can exchange it.
Wow. Yeah, it's really cool. It's like having a market that's just determined by the software.
Exactly.
Or something.
Yeah.
So then the other thing I wanted to ask about was you kept saying that basically you can build a blockchain so that certain functions are cheaper. But why can't you do that via the smart contract? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, smart contracts. So it's very in Ethereum, for example, everything is very generic, and then you have some functionalities that they are built to be faster. So the way they do that is via opcodes or precompiles, which basically means that the client understands certain code, and instead of running it in the virtual machine, it just runs it in a much more efficient way directly, almost native way, right? Instead of this virtual machine. And so you can, and the whole thesis around Polkadot, Cosmos, all of these protocols is that you may be able to architect your whole chain using these things. So everything is faster and cheaper instead of running super generic virtual machines. Of course, I think the concept of a virtual machine is amazing because with Ethereum, you can code anything. You are not constrained to what the precompiles or what the opcodes say. You can build anything. That's the main difference with Bitcoin, right? And what made it attractive. But on the other hand, I think having the power for the whole Aragon community to also basically govern what goes into a precompile, what goes into an opcode, what is optimized, what is even not optimized. Maybe there are things that we don't want to optimize for, that we want to make them slower, so like we incentivize less usage of that. So I think that's a very cool concept, like reclaiming sovereignty from layer one, basically.
Oh, now I'm understood. So that's why there have been all these votes around whether or not to either invest in Polkadot or build on Polkadot. It's because if you do that, if you build on Polkadot, then you could have a parachain that is, now I see, where it's like kind of customized for the needs of Aragon.
Yeah, exactly. And then DAOs can choose, right? Maybe if you are building a DAO that is all about interacting with like Compound and DAI and all of these protocols, maybe there's still a case for Ethereum, and you want to have super high security. It's going to be super expensive to interact with that DAO for sure. But if you want to do that, there's still a huge use case for that. But we also want to enable other use cases, like, organizing with my friends. Maybe I want to create a DAO with like 10 people, or I want to run a fundraising and I want people to be able to put money in without having to pay $1 per transaction. Then you want to enable that other set of use cases as well.
Okay. I actually want to go back to ask about the jury one more time, or the court, because I was noticing, so basically when you were describing how the jurors come to their decision, you guys, conceded that, okay, jurors might discuss the vote with each other offline. But then you also said that the juror fees are, quote, distributed proportionally among the jurors that voted for the final ruling option, meaning like they basically get paid only if they voted for the one that won. But I feel like, doesn't that give the jurors a financial incentive to collude? And then also, like, because, they have to stake the ANT, it seems like they would be incentivized to always vote in favor of what is the best for the value of their own token. But I didn't know if that could sometimes skew the outcomes in a weird way, and if you found that desirable, or if you even had thought that, realized that might happen.
Yeah, well, first on collusion, the idea is that if that happens, we can still kind of raise that to the next level, and then the next set of jurors.
Like with the appeal, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
You do an appeal, and then the next set of jurors may not collude again, so like it may go back to like the original sort of outcome that the case should have had in the first place. And then for ANT and actually like sort of the incentive there, that's an interesting question, and there is some research. This is not going to be in our version 1. It's too complex, but there has been research on basically if the whole network gets corrupted, on doing what it's called like a futarchy fork. So basically, what will happen there is that if the whole network
actually, just describe for people what futarchy is.
Yeah, for sure. So futarchy is this very cool almost governance mechanism, but not really, in which you basically have like two different prediction markets. And so basically you predict what is going to be the winning option over a certain metric. So for example, let's say you are running a country. And so this country, you define that the success metric is the GDP of the country. And then you have like two different presidents. And so you may vote or you may bet on the president that is going to increase the GDP more. And then if one president wins and then increases the GDP, you get rewarded for betting on that. And then if, on the contrary, the GDP goes down, then you get slashed, or you may just not get rewarded for that outcome. And so there's this final process that is very much in research right now, which is that if the whole network gets corrupted, so like ANT holders all get corrupted, and there's like a 51% attack on the whole network, which will be like very expensive, but could happen. Then you could basically split the network in two, and then run a futarchy market on which is going to be the ANT price in the future. And so if the network is incentivized to keep running and to keep the court running, you could predict that ANT price will go up if the court case is actually resolved in a rational way, right? Instead of being like corrupt. And so if you do that, you could basically choose a fork in which ANT is valued more, because that's the one in which people are betting that the outcome was right, and ditch the other one. It's like a very sort of like sci-fi structure, but it's very interesting. And Luke Duncan from our team proposed it a few months ago, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
And wait, so just so I understand, it's sort of like you it would be like if back when Ethereum Classic split from Ethereum, if there were like markets placed on which one, and
Exactly.
but then what would happen? So so whichever one has the high GDP or whatever, then what? You kill off the other chain? Like how? Like that's not possible, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically what will happen is that people just kind of migrate from one to the other, and that's it. Like you have like two different tokens, and then there is one token that accrues value because people bet on it, and the other one who loses value and may end up being worthless.
Okay, but I don't know. With ideology, some people might be convinced that they were right anyway. But anyway, okay. All right, so we've been talking a lot about governance of like the DAOs within Aragon, but then let's talk about the governance of Aragon itself, because you have a way of governing Aragon, which is called AGP, which is sort of similar to like an Ethereum improvement proposal or a Bitcoin improvement proposal. So describe the AGP system.
Yeah, so AGPs are Aragon governance proposals, and they are the ways that you can change Aragon or govern Aragon. And so there is AGP 0, which is the Aragon Manifesto. It's like a very broad mission statement about the project, which lists the values that the project has. And then there is AGP 1, which is the governance process itself, like how you can submit AGPs and get them passed and approved. And then there are just like AGPs that people are proposing. And so these AGPs may take different shapes. So one of them is like a finance track AGP, which basically is around finance management and funding different teams and funding initiatives. There is a meta track, which changes the process itself, the governance process itself. And there's a proclamations track, for example, this like Fight for Freedom Day that I was talking about that was put in by the network. It was a proclamation. It was the network proclaiming, I want to have a national holiday, so to say. And so the cool thing about these AGPs is that they get voted by the whole network, and then AGP holders are free to vote, and then whatever happens is executed. So right now, there is a point in centralization, though, that I have to talk about, which is there is this legal entity in Switzerland called the Aragon Association, and that one right now curates proposals and uses this mechanism, this voting mechanism, as signaling for what to do. But like in the end, the Aragon Association is the one that is executing these things and is curating them as well. And so that's the point of centralization. And the issue why we cannot get away with it right now is because the Aragon Association has to curate these proposals so they are not outright illegal, right? Because right now the Aragon Association is the one like that has the funds for taking care of the project, and so he has the power over these finances. And if the Aragon Association just basically sent money somewhere that was maybe illegal, then I would have been held liable. How we want to change it and fully decentralize the project is actually using the Aragon Court. So one of the first use cases that we're going to have for the court is actually ourselves. We're going to transition the money, the finances, the funds for the project into a DAO. And then we, instead of curating that via the Aragon Association, we're just going to have this sort of like manifesto, and then people will be able to propose AGPs, and the network, like token holders, may actually approve or reject them for the ballot. So if the AGPs don't agree or don't really empower or don't really follow the Aragon manifesto, then you can open a dispute, and basically they don't go to the vote. So that's how we plan to decentralize the process entirely.
Okay, there's so much to unpack there, but basically, so the Aragon Association is sort of like the Ethereum Foundation in Switzerland.
Exactly.
Where essentially it has control of the funds from the crowd sale.
Yeah.
But then there are like literal people that have signed on as directors, where in Switzerland, if you guys do anything out of line with the mission of the association, then you can be held personally liable.
Yeah.
So now you want to decentralize that into, did you say it was a smart contract or a DAO?
It's a DAO, yeah.
But so what I didn't get was this part where people vote and then you disperse the funds based on how they vote. So how does that happen? Because it to my mind, it would seem like you would need a multi-sig, but then there's like people in control of that multi-sig.
Yeah.
So,
well, we want to decentralize the funds as well. So like the DAO will be one having the funds.
Okay, right. But then for the DAO to make a transaction, who initiates that?
And the good thing is that the governors of this DAO would be ANT holders. So ANT holders initiate the vote, and then if the support threshold is passed and the vote passes, then it automatically gets executed and the money goes out. Like
the smart contract does it, or
exactly, yeah.
Like it's just coded.
Yeah.
Okay, so people vote like, let's give Laura 100% of the tokens,
exactly.
and that passes. Then like what? Then
it happens.
So the smart contract sees, okay, it's passed. Oh, okay. So I get it. So then whoever makes the proposal, they're proposing a piece of code where it's like, if such and such, then move the money to Laura's address, something like that.
Yeah, it's pretty much like that. Yeah, like when you open a DAO these days and you create like a finance proposal, for example, what you are saying is, my intent is to get money from this place to this other place, and I want to get maybe 100 ANT, like token and also amount, and then when it's passed, then automatically like the smart contract basically executes that intent.
Okay, so this has happened multiple times now in the conversation, but it's very good because you keep like answering the question almost before I get there. Because my next question was to ask about your ideal governance, which you remember I asked you about in the beginning. And I was wondering how Aragon currently falls short. So that seems like one way, but are there any other ways where you feel like Aragon, needs to make other changes to get closer to your ideal?
One interesting conversation we're having in the Aragon community right now is around locked voting and rewards for voting. So there was this very interesting AEP that happened, I think, in the last vote or in the previous one, which was about Aragon buying dots on Polkadot. And there was...
Which was just because you guys wanted to invest like $1.5 million into dots, right?
Something it was something like that. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so that was a very interesting proposal because basically it didn't pass at the end, but then there was this other proposal called Ep.135, which was about not building Aragon on Polkadot. So there was Amin from like Spankchain and Moloch proposed that one, and that one
he was rejected. On Unchained. In case people missed that episode, you should listen to it. It's very good. Okay. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, so there was Ep.135, which was about like Aragon not building on Polkadot, and Amin posted this tweet like, who can lend me 1 million ANT so I can like sway the vote. I can vote on my proposal and I can get it passed, right? And the issue with tokens right now is that they are tradable. So, it's not an issue, right? It's just like a functionality they have, but you can buy them, and if they are useful for governance, you may be able to sway the result of the vote. And so there's this idea about locked voting, which is you lock your tokens for maybe a year, and you get a reward for voting. So you get more voting power. You lock them for 4 years, you get even more. You lock them for 100 years, you get even more. And so the idea there is that you want to have people in your community that are really incentivized for the long term of the project. So the more they lock their tokens, the more incentivized they are for the like long-term outcomes and not the short-term ones. So you prevent communities or having communities which are made of like, pump and dumpers basically, which happens a lot in the crypto space. And so that's one interesting conversation. The other one is around rewarding votes. So rewarding people who vote, maybe via inflation. But then you have the problem of random voting. So like you don't want to incentivize people to just go there and like random vote whatever they want to vote. You need to make sure that they read and they understand it. And so maybe a combination of rewards plus locked voting would be an ideal way to actually incentivize people to stay and take decisions in the long term.
And then just so I understand, so for the locked votes, like the longer you lock them, then the more weight your vote has?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it's similar to the lock drop that Edgeware was doing, where you get more tokens the longer you lock them up. Well, one other thing that I wanted to ask about was, so voter participation has so far been low. Like on that, for the one, so that vote in the spring on whether or not to buy dots at all, less than 5% of all tokens were used in that vote. So how do you plan to get higher levels of participation?
Well, I think there are multiple ways to achieve that. One of them is user experience. I think right now it just takes money to vote. It's a very long process. And also, if there are like 10 proposals on the ballot, some of them are very complex and you need to like study them. So it takes a lot of time. It literally takes like a full day for an Aragon community member to study them and vote accordingly. So that could be enhanced way more. I think also delegated voting will help. So we're planning to implement that. So you can delegate your votes to someone else, and then they can vote. I think in the future it will be less of a direct democracy, and more as like representative. I think that's where the world has been going for the last hundreds of years, right? We have like these representative democracies. And so I think that's great. But these new systems also allow you to vote directly if you don't want to go through like these intermediaries, right? So I think that's great. And also with this liquid democracy, you are able to basically delegate. And then if the representative is doing something wrong, you can automatically delegate to another one. You don't have to wait for 4-year terms. And so I think that's super interesting to increase participation, turnout. On the other hand, I have to say, I think we're very obsessed with participation, and we shouldn't focus on that so much. We should focus on the outcome of the decisions. And so if you look at the Aragon Network and the outcomes of their decisions, so far it's been like amazing. Like I'm really amazed by there hasn't been any major like decision that has impacted the project in a negative way. And so I think the important part is the decision outcome and not the participation rate necessarily.
Well, one thing also is that at this moment, there's not a lot of usage of the network. Like there are fewer than 700 organizations in Aragon so far. And then there's even like less than $1 million in Aragon smart contracts. So what are your plans to get more adoption?
That is a great question. I think that's one of the main problems of this space. Like we are building technology that is very idealistic, but the issue is how to get like actual like mainstream users. I think fundraising will really help. It's a use case that I love. Aragon fundraising, it's actually, I think, the best way to fundraise from anywhere in the world, and then do it in an accountable and transparent way. So I think that will really have a lot of adoption in the short term. We're also launching a new version that is going to make it way easier for people to use Aragon in terms of user experience. So I think that will really help as well. I think there is one missing piece, which is onboarding, like crypto onboarding and like private keys and all of these things. And I'm very excited to see that more and more projects are taking on it. Because ideally, like you don't need to remember private keys. You don't need to install MetaMask. You just like use it like a Web2 app almost. And so I think that will really help adoption as well. Focusing on niche use cases and kind of hand-holding users, this is something that I'm very excited about, and we have started doing more and more. And because there is where you see the struggles that people are having. And so I think that will really help in the medium term. I think in the short term, it's actually very tough to get mainstream adoption. I think even what we are seeing is that people are using Aragon in the crypto scene more than mainstream right now, because the crypto people actually understand way better why they need it, right? So we had this example of like Melon Protocol, which launched their token sale time ago, and they built the protocol.
Wait, Melon?
Yeah, Melon.
Oh, she was on Mona was on my show too.
Nice, yeah, they are great. And so I think as of a few days ago, actually, they transitioned their whole governance to an Aragon DAO.
Oh, wow.
So they have this DAO of token holders, and these token holders vote a council, and this council can upgrade the smart contracts. So that's adoption right there. But I think we're going to see mainstream adoption more in the medium, long term, and not so much in the short term. I think in the short term, crypto adoption is going to be the most powerful.
Yeah. When I was researching this, I was like, this is getting really futuristic. And I was like, this isn't like something that people are really, using a lot now.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. And I did another episode with like Glenn Weil and Santiago Siri, and some of the ideas were similar. So you kind of mentioned something about this, but I wanted to ask you directly. And this is actually something I'm not certain about, but I did read somewhere that you personally have a large percentage of ANT. I could not verify that. I tried to figure that out, but I couldn't. So you can correct me if I'm wrong. But regardless, like, do you think in general the concept of whales adversely affects governance? And if so, how, would you guys try to address that?
Yeah, well, I think there is a lot of hate against like plutocracy, and I think on one hand, like that's understandable, but on the other hand, having people who have like a strong skin in the game is actually very good. Like I think if you're a VC fund, for example, and you put up a significant amount of your portfolio to just buy a token because you really believe in the future of it, then capital at the end of the day is like how you stake in these systems, if you will. So like if you build that position over time, you of course deserve like to govern it in some way. I think the confusion comes in where when we talk about common goods versus not common goods. And so I think actually I had an interesting discussion yesterday about this where someone was arguing that Bitcoin and Ethereum were not protocols because protocols are just standards and standards are free. So with Bitcoin and Ethereum, you need to buy to be part of it. So I think actually what we are seeing is that what we call protocols are not protocols, they are networks, and they are, as I see them, they are like a next version or next generation shareholder governance. So in traditional corporate, you have shareholders and they govern the whole system. Usually they are very institutionalized, and we have like companies like Apple, Google, which had a lot of like early investors back in the day, which basically kind of had all the growth, all the upside from these networks. And now with Bitcoin and Ethereum, we're seeing that more and more retail investors are getting in, and they are also profiting from these huge networks that have been built in the early beginning. And I think that's the beauty of it. Like, they are much more open, they are much more fluid. You don't need to be an accredited investor, you don't need to be a VC to access it real quick or in the very beginning of the project. Like, if you look at Bitcoin, for example, it wasn't VC firms that got Bitcoin at $1. It was cypherpunks, people who were buying drugs. It was like completely different crowd. And I think that's like the way to look at it. It's like an extended version of shareholder governance, like a next generation shareholder governance, and not so much common goods, although it also has like a little bit of a common good, but I wouldn't look at it that way as of right now, at least.
Yeah. The one comment I have about that is I think there were some wealthy people who got in at $1, but I won't name them on the podcast.
Okay.
But anyway, I actually wanted to just ask more directly about that issue with the Polkadot vote. And you kind of addressed it with the locked voting, but I didn't know if there was like anything else you would add. But basically, so just for people who don't know, and I can't remember if we described on the show, but basically there was this vote, should we stay focused on Ethereum or should we also develop on Polkadot? And as the vote was going along, it seemed like the sentiment was to stay developing on Ethereum. And then at the very last minute, somebody put in a ton of tokens to sway the vote in the other direction, where like it would be really impossible in a short amount of time to overcome the tokens they'd put in. So would the locked voting solve that, or are there any other solutions you guys are thinking of?
Yeah, to be more specific, like the vote, the outcome of the vote was like no, but like I think it was like 1% more no than yes, and then this whale made it like way, more kind of no than yes in the end, but it was already no. I think with locked voting, you may be able to solve it. But I don't think it's an issue. Like in this particular case, I was trying to like identify who this person was, and I couldn't. That's the beauty of it. But I was trying to identify, like, just going to Etherscan and seeing what tokens they held and all of that. And it was like an OG, like an Aragon OG. So like this person was in the community for a long time, and so I think with locked voting, you actually like maybe even this person has more power. But they were an OG. I think I don't know if they bought in the market I cannot remember. But definitely I think, if they have bought this share of their cake, I think they thought it legitimate that they vote.
Okay, so you don't have any other ways to kind of prevent the gaming of the system in this way? Or do you not see it as gaming?
Well, there is one way. I don't see it as gaming, to be honest, but there is one way that you can prevent this kind of last-minute votes. Like, I think the issue is last-minute votes, right? In the last minute, someone basically changing the outcome. And so you can have this mechanism for voting that is actually also been kind of discussed in the community, which is that if there's a significant change in answer in the last like minutes or hours, or if there's like a significant amount of votes, you can extend the period of time of that vote for like 24 hours or 48, something like that, and then do that again and again and again until like basically there are no like final last minute votes. And then at that point, it's like the final outcome is revealed. So I think the stuff like that may help. Also, like kind of lock and reveal voting, where votes are not transparent by default, but you have to like commit first and then reveal it at the end, and then like all votes are public but used at the end and not like real time. I think that could help.
And obviously, you and I were here this week in Berlin for Web3 and DAppCon. So did you guys present anything, or like what milestones will people be looking at going forward? Yeah, so my co-founder Jorge presented the Aragon Network, and it was so cool because like the room was so packed. It was really amazing to see like the interest on a court system, which like 2 years ago was sci-fi, and no one really believed that could be like done. Then I had the opening keynote at the Web3 Summit, and the Web3 Summit this year was very much about DAOs. Like, it was kind of crazy. It was me, and then Ryan Soder presenting some ideas around very interesting DAOs that are coming up. Then there was a DAO panel. Then it was Yalda from one of the Aragon development teams called Otark presenting their Aragon apps and their suite for like Aragon organization. So it was pretty much about DAOs, and I'm super excited because like
I think, we saw this trend coming, but we didn't see the interest so much in the community these past 2 years or so. I think the stigma around the DAO was still being carried around. And I think now we are liberating ourselves from that, and we are ready to do the DAO 2.0 kind of thing, right? So I'm super, super excited about it. And then we also presented the Aragon design system, which is our take on enhancing consistency across all the Aragon platform and making sure that Aragon app developers can easily design new apps by basically dragging and dropping components.
Yeah. So a couple things. So I wanted to do this show partially because I know everybody's talking about DAOs again. So I was like, okay, this is a good way to kind of, be on trend. But then the other thing was that actually it's funny that we mentioned the space thing before, because Yaldav's idea is about governance in space.
Yeah.
She wants to, what was it? It's something it's a decentralized organization to explore space or something?
Yeah, it's like a decentralized SpaceX, basically.
Okay. Yeah. So that's funny that was a theme in this episode. Well, anyway, thanks so much for coming on Unchained.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for joining us today. To learn more about Luis and Aragon, check out the show notes inside your podcast player. If you're not yet subscribed to my other podcast, Unconfirmed, which is shorter and a bit newsier, be sure to check that out. Also, find out what I think are the top crypto stories each week by signing up for my email newsletter at unchainedpodcast.com. Unchained is produced by me, Laura Shin, with help from Fractal Recording, Anthony Yoon, Daniel Ness, and Rich Stroffolino. Thanks for listening.